Okay, if I've done this lesson right today, we're going to have an awful lot of fun. If I end up doing it wrong today, I'm sure that Richard will flagellate me with a wet noodle. So we'll leave that be. But at any rate, I had to tell you, I was just stunned that this was the week that this particular text arose. And so what we need to do is we need to I'm just going to read Luke 21 for you. You need to have the whole thing in your head, this apocalyptic discourse. And as some spoke of the temple, how it was adorned with noble stones and offerings, he said, as for these things which you see, the days will come when there shall not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. And they said, Teacher, when will this be? And what will be the sign this is about to take place? And he said, Take heed that you are not led astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am he, or the time is at hand. Don't go after them. And when you hear of wars and tumults, do not be terrified, for this must first take place, but the end will not be at once. And then he said, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and pestilences. And there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. But before all this, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors for my name's sake. This will be a time for you to bear testimony. Settle it in your minds then, not to meditate beforehand how to answer. I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which none of your adversaries will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be delivered up, even by parents and brothers and kinsmen and friends, and some of you they will put to death. You will be hated by all for my name's sake, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your lives. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those inside the city depart. Let not those who are out in the country enter it, for these are days of vengeance, to fulfill all that is written. Alas, for those who are with child and for those who give suck in those days, for great distress shall be upon the earth and wrath upon this people, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive among all the nations. And Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And there will be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations in perplexity at the roaring of the sea and waves, men fainting with fear and the foreboding of what is coming on in the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now, when these things begin to draw near, look up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. And he told them a parable. Look at the fig tree. Okay, so on, and we'll come to the parable and then the exhortation there at the end. You have this apocalypse in your head now, right? This little apocalypse. Now, the first of the synoptics to create this little apocalypse is Mark, in Mark 13. But Mark 13 doesn't appear to be piecemeal. And when the scholars look at it and they ask about the potential background of this, they immediately turn to the Caligula crisis of 41. Now, we want to remember, in 41, when Caligula is going to come and, he's commissioned a statue of himself to be made that's going to be put in the Jerusalem temple, okay? He's going to violate everything. This is the year 41. Paul writes his letters to the Thessalonians Okay, this is going to be important in a little bit here. So if this apocalyptic discourse is created in 41, and if we remember Geert Tyson teaching us that the passion narrative was also created in and around this time because of the death of James, now we have 41 as this focal pivotal point that can produce both the story of Jesus' death and also the story of the impending death of Jesus' followers. And that little apocalyptic discourse then gets framed and probably edited as it moves on from 41 until 70, when Mark will pick it up as a piece of tradition and do his own editing on it and then insert it into his gospel. Okay. Now, when you look at this, these discourses side by side, Matthew will do his general midrashing on different things, but Luke has some very significant edits in his discourse that don't correspond at all to the Mark and Apocalypse. And we want to look at a couple of these, and then and only then do I want to turn and have a conversation about Apocalypse Today, or Apocalypse Now, as the movie puts it. So in the frame, Matthew and Mark both, I'm sorry, I've got my text. Where's my text start? Luke 21, 1-4. Or 5, there we go. Mark and Matthew both have Jesus leave the temple and go out to the Mount of Olives. And while they're on the Mount of Olives, they can look up across the valley and they can see the temple. And that's when either, according to Mark, Peter, James, and John, and Andrew asked him privately, or Matthew, the disciples came to him privately, or in Luke, just the generic, and they asked him, whoever the they is. Luke still has Jesus in the temple. Remember what narrative follows right before this is the widow's mite. So Jesus is still in the temple in Luke, whereas he's outside the temple in Mark and Matthew. They all three synoptics have the same two questions. When will this be, and what will be the sign that lets us know that it's about to happen? And the first thing Jesus has to say to them is, take heed lest anyone lead you astray. There will be those that claim I am he. There will be those that tell you that the time has come. This is it. He says, don't listen to them. Excuse me. Next comes wars and rumors of wars. And they are to not be either alarmed in the language of Matthew and Mark, or terrified in the language of Luke. All this must take place. And Matthew and Mark have, but the end is not yet, whereas Luke simply has, but the end will not be at once. Then again, he tells them nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places, and there will be famines. And Luke adds, and pestilences, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. This is what Luke adds. And then we move down to Matthew and Mark saying, then Matthew says, then after all this happens, then they will deliver you to death. Luke has, but before all this, they will deliver you to death. So Luke has the persecution of the disciples prior to this apocalyptic crash, whereas Matthew has the apocalyptic crash first, and then the disciples getting blamed or scapegoated. Either way, they're getting blamed. All three synoptics tell you, don't think about what you're going to say ahead of time. And all three synoptics tell you that you will be delivered up by parents and teachers and kinsmen, and you will be hated for all because of my name's sake. Now we get to another difference here, and we're going to come back and we're going to unpack some of this stuff here. Then we get to in Mark, when you see the desolating sacrilege set up where it ought not to be. And then Mark's parenthesis, let the reader understand. Then those who are on the mountains in Judea flee to the mountains. Matthew has something very similar. When you see the desolating sacrilege spoken of by the prophet. Now, Matthew, whereas Mark, it's when you see the desolating sacrilege, let the reader understand. Mark is alluding to a text, the prophet Daniel. Matthew just comes and spells it out, spoken by the prophet. Let the reader understand. He carries that over from Mark, flee to the mountains. But notice what Luke does. Luke has, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation, that is Jerusalem, the city, not just the temple, but the whole city, has come near. So the first thing I want to do is ask about this desolating sacrilege. And for that, we have to turn to the book of Daniel. In the book of Daniel, this desolating sacrilege is mentioned 3 times. I'm going to read all 3 texts to you. And you know, Daniel, again, this is a piece of the puzzle here. Daniel is a book written during the Maccabean crisis. It's pseudepigraphal. The author writing this book during the Maccabean crisis has a very specific referent in mind when he's talking in this text about the leader that is going to stand up against God, or the one we more colloquially call the Antichrist, okay? Whatever this figure is. But Daniel's writing in the midst of the Maccabean revolution, and Antiochus Epiphanes had it, absolutely had it. This is what precipitates the revolution. We've been over this before when we did some history a couple of years back, but to remind you, when Judea begins to become Hellenized, and at first the Ptolemies and then later the Seleucids are running the empires there, and you have this Hellenic influence coming in, and Jews choosing no longer to be circumcised or not follow the Sabbath or not eat kosher. Well, that turns the zealots, crazy in their heads. And when Antiochus Epiphanes can't calm this kind of proto-nationalism, this nationalistic movement, he goes and slaughters a pig on the altar. Now, this, I believe, is in 164 BCE. He slaughters a pig on the altar. Number one, they had to take that altar down. They didn't even know what to do with the stones, so they put the stones from that altar in a special room. And they figured that when Messiah comes, he could tell them what to do with those stones, because they were the altar, but they'd been defiled. And so they had to rebuild the altar. Here's what Daniel is saying about this figure who wants to set himself up in the temple. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of the anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and a moat, but in a troubled time. And after 32 weeks an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall cause sacrifice and offering to cease. And upon the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. That's the first text. There are 2 other texts in the book of Daniel, chapter 11, verse 31, which simply references this figure again, saying, forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the continual burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. And then again, at the end of chapter 12, where this abomination of desolation, or this abomination that creates desolation, occurs. In his commentary on Mark 8 through 16, Joel Marcus, got that for those of you that are writing these things down? Joel Marcus, great. I only use great commentaries. Excellent commentary. Here is how he describes this abomination of desolation. This mysterious phrase originates in the book of Daniel, where it refers to an idolatrous statue, an abomination that makes God's temple desolate by defiling its holy place and causing pious worshipers to avoid it. Now, after Antiochus Epiphanes is going to, after he desecrates the temple, he would set up a statue. Again in 41, we have the same thing happening here. Think about this for just a second. What is it that causes the great revolution that transforms Second Temple Judaism? Is this attempt to Hellenize and to do away with Jewish practice by Antiochus Epiphanes IV. In 41, it's the Caligula crisis that will precipitate the kind of thinking that went on during the Maccabean Revolution. Okay? In other words, somebody's going to set up a statue in our temple. Oh, haven't we been here before? Isn't there a narrative we have about this? What can we do? We can revolt. Now, the book of Daniel, as a piece of apocalyptic literature written previous and during this crisis, but not after the revolution had matured and beat back the Greeks. Writing in the midst of this crisis, just as the writer of the Gospel of Mark is writing as the temple is being destroyed, as Jerusalem is being stormed and sieged by Rome. Both these writers, both of them, Mark's referring, I guess what I'm trying to say is Mark's referring back to the Danielic Maccabean image there of that abomination of desolation. You have Jesus saying that this is going to occur again. There seems to be, from the perspective of at least the Markan Matthean tradition, that there will either be a statue or a person. And the reason they say person is because the noun abomination is in the masculine. Whether it's a statue or a person, well, we can go to 41 CE. We can talk about Caligula wanting to erect a statue of himself in the temple. The statue represents the person of Caligula and the power of Rome. So whether there is to be understood a literal figure, like an Antichrist type figure, or whether we're just dealing with the production and placement of images, and in this case, the images of the ruling authorities in the temple, for me is a moot question. Okay, it's not necessary to answer from my perspective. But then we have to ask the question, if the apocalypse as it's created includes that reference back to the Maccabean Revolution and Antiochus Epiphanes, and the early Christians are seeing this, the early Jewish Christians are seeing this repeated now in 41, when Mark is writing his text, this and other events where there's been attempts to place images in the temple have passed, and now the temple is falling. But the question is, why does Luke omit any reference to the abomination of desolation? Why does he do that? Seems to me that he's going to end up doing it for the same reason Paul does. We remember that Paul in the Thessalonian letters, written in 41, written around that Caligula crisis, have this man of sin, this man of lawlessness. This is for sure Caligula. Okay, he's got the emperor in mind. But as we know, Paul changed his eschatology, and we know Paul dropped a number of things that were very important to Second Temple Jewish eschatology. And this is going to just be another one of those indicators that the Pauline tradition, both Paul and the Lucan writer, no longer have some kind of Antichrist figure at the end. Okay? Second, there are those who want to say that Judgment Day, as it were, occurred in 70 CE. That's certainly Luke's perspective. He does not have this sacrilegious desolation occurring. He has Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, cuts off all the food supply and everything else, and they build the siege works. Takes them 2.5 years to build these siege works, and then they head over the walls. For Luke, what is happening here in this destruction of the temple, he calls it the days of vengeance, ekdikesis. Now, here's what I found very interesting. Just work with me on this for a second. We're not told whose vengeance this is. And nowhere in this text does God appear to be the author of any of the calamities that are occurring. Now, those two insights, of course, I got from René Girard's reading of the Apocalyptic Discourse of Mark. But when we go back to chapter 18, and we have the parable of the unjust judge, you have the widow saying, "Vindicate me, ekdikesin me, against my adversary. Bring vengeance." She wants vengeance. She is being, whatever this adversary is doing to her, she wants revenge. She wants not just justice. This is not a petty trifle. This is revenge. She wants this judge to dish out a punishment best served cold in that sense. So when Luke calls these days of vengeance, and we know from the previous parable that God is not to be identified with the unjust judge who does that. God is rather to be identified and understood by his children who have trust in him and don't have to sit there and ask God for vengeance. The days of vengeance then could be easily be understood as God's judgment, but not God doing the judging. In other words, God has taken hands off of human history. And the Jewish nation brought the destruction of the temple upon themselves because they had rejected the message that they needed to make peace with their adversaries, lest they be thrown in jail and have to pay the last farthing. They were being told by Jesus, I have a better way, follow me. My way is not rooted or grounded in violence. And if we follow my way, we can usher in the blessings of the kingdom. But because they refused, now the consequences of that refusal are going to play themselves out. Apocalypse is what happens when the refusal to hear the revelatory voice of God and change one's ways from being basically, as we would say, mimetically entangled and thus rivalrous and violent. There's only the one way out. And if we don't take that way out, we will end up in the kinds of crises that can literally engulf the entire planet. Yeah. I don't need to spend any time on the warnings about those who are pregnant with children getting out of Dodge. That's pretty simple. Matthew and Mark both have if you're on the roof, don't go into the house and gather anything. Just run. If you're in the field and your cloak is on the other side of the field, leave it. Just run. There's an urgency here. It's a recognition that if you're in the way, you will be collateral damage. All of this language is purely anthropological. There's no divine retribution in this text. And the text never says that it's God that brings that destruction on Jerusalem, although it would appear that for Luke, who's writing his text, again, after the first two synoptists, it's at least a decade and a half since that event. You know, things have calmed down, especially if Mark is writing in the 70s and Matthew in the late 70s, that event's still fresh in everybody's mind. I mean, if I said to you it was 22 years since 9/11, you know, that's 22 years, a long time. The effect isn't there anymore. You know what I mean? We've birthed a whole new generation since that time. Okay, moving forward. This is where Luke and Matthew and Mark now start. They all have the same sets of sayings, but some of them are included in other different parts of their gospel. So for example, whereas Matthew and Mark have here, don't worry about what you'll say in that day, the Holy Spirit will tell you. And Luke doesn't have that, but Luke has the very similar saying back in chapter 12. Okay, so most of the eschatological discourse in Mark 13 is taken over by Matthew and Luke, but it does get piecemealed occasionally into other places, especially so for Luke. Then he gets to the parable of the fig tree, and he says, look at the fig tree and all the trees, and as soon as they come out in leaf, you see for yourselves and you know that summer is coming. And what also is coming after summer? The figs, right? So when you see these things taking place, you know that the reign of God is truly near. And then we have this very troublesome saying, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away till all this has taken place. Heaven and earth may pass away, but my words will never pass away. In other words, Jesus is clearly aware that there's an imminent end to this thing known as we call Second Temple Judaism. Jesus is acutely aware of this. He's also aware that it's not going to happen immediately, that there are processes that have to work themselves out. That, in other words, what he's recognizing is that as mimetic rivalry grows and grows and grows, it grows exponentially. So, for example, if I said to you, would you rather have a penny a day for 1 month or $1 million? You all know, first of all, it's a trick question. But the penny a day that gets doubled every day, on the first you got 1 cent, then 2 cents, 4 cents. By the end of the first week, you only got 64 cents. It's only in the last 3 days of that month that number starts going and it hits 500,000, 1 million, 2 million, 4 million. Okay? It's at the end you see the greatest growth. Until then, it looks like this. And then it just does this parabolic thing. That's the same with cycles of human history. And I think well, I may not have shown you guys. I do read a lot of economic charts and demographic charts and just different charts related to statistical charts. And whenever you have what's called a hockey stick pattern like this, okay, where something goes parabolic, okay, that means trouble. Because that's not how the human condition tends to move, like this. You know, 2 steps forward, 1 back, 2 forward, 1 back, 3 forward, 2 back. That's how we tend to go. We don't do that hockey stick thing. And when you see events piling up on events, it's just adding to that logarithm of growth. And it's again, it's only at the end that you see either the best, in the case of the penny for a month, per day for a month, or the worst. And we're dealing here with human history, so we are talking about the worst. Now, before I move on, I want to remind you of something Renee said in Things Hidden. He says, we must realize that the apocalyptic violence predicted by the Gospels is not divine in origin. In the Gospels, the violence is always brought home to men and not to God. What makes the reader think that this is still the Old Testament wrath of God is the fact that most features of the apocalypse, the great images in the picture, are drawn from Jewish texts. These images remain relevant because they describe the mimetic and sacrificial crisis. And then he says, we find precisely the same structure of crisis in the Gospels, but by this time there's no longer a God to cut short the violence or indeed to inflict it in the first place. What we have here is the lengthy decomposition of the city of man, in which a disoriented humanity meets in chaotic confrontation. You've heard me say, and getting louder and louder about it, that we literally live in this time. There is perhaps no more powerful text than this particular text, because it's warning us that as things escalate out of control, those of us who are following Jesus will become scapegoats. Let me say that again. This is the happy, clappy, fun part. Okay? There is no rapture. There is no rapture. What happens is, as this crisis escalates out of control, Christianity is going to take a shellacking. Now, if you ask me, it's rightly so. In other words, Christendom, as part of Western culture, as part of this edifice that we call global culture, it all needs to go. The whole thing needs to go. And we know for a fact that unlike any other time in human history, and very much behind the scenes, the powers that be are literally reconfiguring the plumbing of both the economic and the political systems of the planet, as well as the way we do this thing called human society. We are being engineered, my friends. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing. Okay, governments have always tried to engineer populations to do what they want them to do. But there is an absolutely huge social engineering experiment going on now, with the recognition that the old system cannot handle the weight and the burden that has been put on it. It's literally collapsing. It's imploding in on itself. And so they're designing the entire new system out. And as they design that entire new system out to get from the one to the other, frankly, it's going to be a bitch. And that occurs, my friends, between now and the end of 2025, when all the ISO regulations and standards that have been on the books for over a decade have to be put in place. In other words, the International Standards Organization, they standardize everything. I mean, why do you think in the last 25 years, you've been able to receive goods and services from around the world more efficiently? It's because the ISO came out and said, look, what we need are shipping containers that are all the same size, rail trains around the world that are the same size that'll hold those containers, trucks that are the same size that'll hold those containers, ships and ports and docks and cranes that are all the same around the world. They standardized the shipping industry. And that's why everything can happen so quickly. Before that, containers were different sizes and you had different sizes of vehicles to transport them and this and that and the other. But by standardizing everything, they raised the efficiency level. Well, they're doing the same thing right now, and they're doing it geopolitically. I also think we are at the beginning of the end of the nation state as we know it. And we are moving in this larger globalization experiment into something which I think has, if I was to play it out in my most negative mind, considering the use of AI and robotics to replace human labor, and we ask, well, what are people going to do for a living? What are they, if there's no jobs to be had, the service industry is taken over by robotics, manufacturing industry is taken over by robotics and AI, what are people going to do? And that raises some real big questions for me. And for me, the ultimate in apocalypse would be the metaverse. And that's where people literally in their homes all day long receive a little compensation from the government that's digitally controlled and programmable. So they have to spend so much on rent, so much on food, and so much for utilities, but they live with their goggles on their head in the metaverse all day long. They create characters, they create their life story in the metaverse. And so their identity becomes their identity of the figure they've created in the social relations that they're in the metaverse. That's my biggest fear, is that we are going to literally dumb down the human species. I'm really, when I look at the future, that's what I see in a worst case scenario. In a best case scenario, the possibilities for everybody on the planet to have equal opportunities, which is something that's been sorely lacking for both minorities in any developed country, but also for the emerging market, the nations in Africa and Asia, it will be a more even playing field to finances and banking. And when that happens, when you're able to bank the unbanked, you're able to help the poor with tools, actual tools to get out of their poverty. You're no longer just throwing money into a burning fire like we tend to do with our charity aid. We're actually providing them with tools to lift themselves up. That's kind of the best of all possible worlds, okay? The scripture outside of the book of Revelation doesn't talk about what happens after an apocalypse. The book of the Revelation does. It says after everything happens, after everything has been destroyed, God will recreate the new heavens and the new earth. At least the Revelator recognizes that in the end, there is a need, not simply for a repristination of the old. The book of Jerusalem doesn't end with make Jerusalem great again, repristinating the old. It's the creation of a new heaven and a new earth, where there is no temple, by the way. There is no temple in the new heaven or the new earth. The chapter concludes with an invitation to pay attention, to watch, to be awake, to be aware. The vast majority of folks, my friends, are stuck in what Kierkegaard calls the crowd, Scripture calls the mob. Girard refers to as the group. Grandfather called them the mindless gray masses. Most people right now today, they're like, yeah, things are changing. Yeah, we got this war over there in Ukraine. We've got, inflation in our grocery stores, and we see it and we feel it. There's nothing we can do about it. We had the whole COVID crisis, which was never let a good crisis go to waste. We have things piling up. And then, of course, the distractions of the last several weeks, that they're just distractions, folks. They're intended to take your eyes off the real deal. And when Jesus says, take heed to yourself, lest your heart be weighed down. When your heart is weighed down, when you're looking at a real situational change for 95% of the people on the planet, and I'm talking to you too, me too, okay? It's easy to let our hearts get weighed down. And Jesus says, don't let your hearts get weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the cares of this life, because that day will come upon you like a snare, like you stepped into it, that bear trap clamped around your ankle, and before you know it, your world's changed. And it will come upon all that dwell on the face of the earth. Watch at all times, because you just never know, my friends, when an event will happen that will change your life. I bet you every one of us has one of those, at least one of them. Something happened in our life we did not see coming, and it turned our life in a direction like that. And every day he was teaching in the temple, but at night he went out and lodged on the Mount of Olives. And then Luke concludes that early in the morning, he's back in the temple, and all the people are there to hear him. All right. We've just had a massive, major discourse in and around the temple, and we remember the role the temple plays in Luke. It opens up in the temple with Zechariah. Luke's gospel will close with the disciples in the temple as Jesus ascends into heaven. And here, in addition to other places where Jesus has talked about the temple and fought with the temple authorities, here we now have the prediction of the collapse of the sacrificial system of Judaism. And it did. Well, I will leave off there. Oh, I did want to point out one other thing. I have to do this. So my scholarly go-to lexicon, my Greek lexicon, is the Bauer Art Gingrich Danker, and Linda will recognize this. I just happened to be looking up ekdekesis. The verb, it's found in classical Greek. It's found in the Book of Enoch. It's found in a fair amount of apocalyptic literature in Judaism, the Testament of Solomon, the Testament of Judah. It's found in Philo, Josephus. It can mean to procure justice for someone, or to inflict appropriate penalty for wrong done. So it doesn't have to be punishment, doesn't have to be perceived as punishment. It can be perceived as justice, I don't know how you can perceive something as justice without it feeling like punishment, though. But in ektakesis, the noun, is vengeance or punishment, a meting out of justice, retaliation for harm done wrong, penalty inflicted on evildoers. Where is it? I wanted to read it to you. Oh, here we go. Okay. Under the entry ektakesis, meting out of justice, retaliation for harm done, penalty inflicted on wrongdoers. Here's what it says. Of the punishment of Paul's opponents, 2 Corinthians 7:11. Of the final judgment, Luke 21:22. Now, friends, there is nothing in Luke 21 that talks about the final judgment, correct? So I just found it interesting how easy it is, even for lexicographical editors or lexicographers, to come along and just automatically assume things about words. I looked at that and I should take a pen and write the word no next to it. Okay, please open up your microphones and let's carry on. In fact, I will do that. I will go write no. There.
Hi, Michael. I'll go ahead. I noticed that you skipped over what, I mean, I'm not saying this was an evasion on your part, but you didn't mention the two verses that mention Son of God, Son of Man, 27 and 36. And I'm just wondering, it would seem to me almost unarguable that Luke wouldn't be referring to Jesus as the Son of Man.
Oh, absolutely, in both places.
But
and you're right, and I didn't skip them intentionally. The first one reads, after you've got the sun, moon, and stars and the heavens collapsing, and then you will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And then on verse 36, watch at all times, praying that you may have the strength to escape all of these things that will take place and to stand before the Son of Man.
So I'm just wondering, especially verse 27, if Luke is referring to, say, the crisis in AD 70, what would he be meaning there, that the Son of Man coming in a cloud at that time? Would he be referring to anything that you know of historically, or what is he referring to there, do you think?
Give me 1 second. I'm just the Markan text. So he's repeating the Markan text almost word for word. I'm assuming this is an early Christian belief in the physical return of Jesus, I guess.
But that hadn't happened when Luke was writing.
No, it hadn't. No, that's exactly right. It hadn't happened. It's David, right, that's talking?
Yes.
Yeah. So here's the challenge for me when I look at a text like this, like when I see the powers of the heavens shaken and the signs in the heavens and the sun, moon, and stars, that to me is language of I almost want to say astronomical metaphysics. The ancients believed that the universe was programmed, and you could look at the stars and the sun and the moon, and you could tell, oh, hey, Mercury's in the 9th house of Capricorn, and that usually means this. You know what I mean? In other words, there's a whole shaking of the foundation of the way that humans conceive of what is ulterior to them. And I'm wondering if at this point, the notion of the true human, it says, comes with power and great glory. I don't, it could be literal, but I'm wondering if it doesn't have to do more with the revelation of this, of who Jesus is and what he did, somehow, percolating through the species. I don't know.
One thing I'll just say one thing. When I first was, if you look just at 25 to 28, say, and it starts with the signs and the sun and the moon, and then the Son of Man coming in a cloud, or the Son of Man coming, it first put me in mind of actually the crucifixion, because you had the signs, the sun, and in the heavens with the crucifixion, and then the Son of Man coming with power on the cross, and obviously we get that from John, and you've taught about that. The other thing that I've been thinking about this is actually the mimetic crisis, where the victim is seen as having this great power.
Well, if that's the case, then dude, there's never been a time in human history when victimage has greater power than it does now. Everybody wants to be a victim. Everybody's a victim.
But what I mean is that crisis where the victim is killed, and then suddenly in that mimetic crisis, everybody says, oh, the experience of
right
that it brings,
right,
they attribute this power to this victim that's brought this peace to them.
Yeah, I again, the discourse itself is very short, and like most apocalyptic writing, a bit enigmatic. But again, what astonishes me is the emphasis in the text on the time it takes for this thing to play out. But when it plays out in that hockey stick formation. You know what I mean? And you can see something coming for a decade, 20 years in advance, if you're astute enough. The Third Reich was predictable, friends. Russia's foray into Ukraine has been predictable since 2013, when the US made a treaty and then violated that treaty, having to do with Russian sovereignty. I mean, these things happen. They might make the news, like Russia backed out of the START treaty. So what does that mean to you and me? Nothing. But the consequences of that decision in 5 or 6 years could be everything. You see what I'm saying? Or, I mean, I know. Yeah, we've got some UK folks here. The Bank of England, my friend, you Brits are going to have a central bank digital currency probably before anybody. And we don't yet know if your parliament has written privacy laws into that currency, because if they don't, that gives the central bank the ability to tell you how much to spend and on what. They can put time limits on it. The money in your account's only good for X number of months. You got to spend it. I mean, once money becomes programmable, they can basically tell you what to do with your life. And they can do like what they do in China, where they have a social credit score. And if you write good things on the websites and the chat rooms and the various social media, why, they'll put $25 in your account. But if you say something negative about something or someone, an authority, they'll deduct $25 from your account. That would be very bad for me. I would be broke fast. I'm just saying, you know, there are decisions that are being made or that have far-reaching implications, and we just have to keep our eyes open to how these things are playing out. You know. So, okay, I'll be very personal here. I shouldn't, but for me, I fully expect my country to end up in a civil war. I don't know that it'll be so much state by state. It might end up being that. We may end up seeing states secede and that kind of thing. I think we'll end up in a civil war. And I'm right now having to decide where I want to live, because it's coming around 2026, 2027. And I want to be out of my place at the end of 2025 and someplace secure before that all happens, because I'll be an old man by then, you know, and be pushing 70. And I don't feel like going through my 70s in a city that's going to end up being burnt to the ground. I want to be at a place where I fled to the mountains. I saw the signs. I got out of Dodge, you know. Yeah, well, sorry for the rabbit trail.
Michael,
Tom,
do you think that it talking about the Son of Man coming down on a cloud could be connected to Daniel 7:13?
it absolutely is. Yeah, absolutely it is. The Ancient of Days comes on a cloud. The one like a Son of Man.
Okay.
It comes from that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I thought I remember there being some connection with that verse to the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, the apocalyptic Son of Man sayings are the hardest of the Son of Man sayings to interpret. The sayings about the Son of Man is the true human, you know. The human was not created for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath for the human. Therefore, the true human is Lord of the Sabbath. Or Jesus, you know, who do people say the Son of Man is? As a circumlocution for himself. The word I in Aramaic, who do people say I am? You know, I mean, we've got those possibilities, but these apocalyptic sayings of Jesus and the Son of Man are the strangest of them. And I have to admit, I've spent 50 years reading literature in and around them, and I've just never been satisfied with anything so far that I've read. And I have yet to have anybody explain to me why Jesus never talks about the reign of God and the Son of Man in the same breath. Kingdom of God and Son of Man are never used in the same sentence together. I'm nervous now. I've got to go back through and make sure I didn't skip texts or too many of them. So what do we know about Luke's view? What does this tell us about how Luke sees this event? You know, he's taken it out of that frame by eliminating the abomination of desolation. He's taking it out of that frame. And now it's the human armies. It's definitely these armies, not this kind of half human, half divine figure. It's just human armies.
It's interesting to me what you said about how they were using 164 BC to describe their current situation. And yet, when I see people using the AD 70 situation to describe our situation, that would make it a little harder to discuss the end of the temple age and the beginning of the church age, or however you want to make that line, because you're acknowledging there is coming, and we will need a coming of Jesus in some sense if we're going to survive, I would think. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen where a physical Jesus comes back, but we better be walking as Jesus, at least in my estimation. Am I out to lunch somewhere there?
No. The thought that did strike me was that the solution to the apocalyptic crisis at the time of the Maccabees was armed revolt, right? And they won. And so it would be little wonder that you would have, like your Qumran literature that has a call to arms in it, or other texts that have a call to arms. When we see this situation here, we're going to be expecting a divine holy war, right? But Jesus seems to be indicating that's not the case. They don't take up arms. They are defenseless. I think he's doing something quite different here with the disciples' relation to apocalypse, as opposed to the disciples of the Maccabees or the Zealots.
And we would have to carry that part forward.
Yeah.
I don't think we can use violence to change the system.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And here's what you're going to see, Lynn. You're going to look, the power of balance is shifting in our generation from west to east. It was always the east, and it only became the west from about the 17th century through today. And after this little 300-400 year period, now transfer of power is going back to the east. U.S. is losing its reserve currency status. The petrodollar is dead. The Saudis are going to be allowing yuan and rubles and other currencies to be used. The dollar's dead. And when the dollar is dead, that's apocalypse for American Christianity. The balance of power is shifting away from the U.S. and to the east, to China, to Russia, to India in particular. And the second greatest power after that's going to be the Eurozone. So, I mean, we're looking at a diminishment of America in a very short period of time. Think about how long it took the British Empire to diminish from the middle of the 1930s. By 1945, the British Empire was no more, right? It just, within a decade, it was done. And then the Brits had 20 years of hard times, very hard times through the early 1970s even. And Britain has only come out of this post-World War II kind of recession days in the last 30 years of globalization. And then they went and decided to do Brexit. They'd had enough of globalization. Anyway, Anthony wants to know, can we understand Christ coming in a cloud in light of cyclical apocalyptic patterns? I kind of think so, dude. You know, this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, okay, so is it a coincidence that we have this Asbury thing happening at this time? Would we expect more of them? Because in a time of great crisis where the powers of heaven are shaken, I mean, we're talking the whole ideological realm of the human, that God wouldn't break in? Wouldn't we expect to see that? I hope so. you know. And finally, let me say this. Because we're shifting from west to east, folks, we are looking at the decline of Christianity. We are looking at the decline of Christianity. Or as Renee says, Christianity is the only religion to predict its own demise. I can't wait until the US gets secularized. I really can't.
Going back, so to answer your question that you asked us, I feel like Luke omitting the abomination and replacing it with more of this military issue. I feel like he could be making it's the statement like moving it away from the religious perspective and rather it's like this is a larger societal problem. This is going to affect not just the religious people, but this is going to affect everybody. So I feel
I'm
like,
with you. Yep.
but it's interesting because it says like he tells them to run,
Yes.
right? And it's not that they're going to die necessarily, but it's rather that those who can understand, those who will take his message seriously will survive, right? And they just kind of have to go into hiding for a while and then come back out. Which made me think about when he says, because he says you have the strength to escape all of these things and to stand before the Son of Man. I feel like that could be a little metaphorical in the sense of like, you know, it's only when you survive these things that you'll be able to kind of see this, see the possibility of this world that Jesus wanted.
Well,
If that makes sense.
I'm not going to say Jesus was a prepper, but in Matthew's eschatological discourse, there is the story about the 5 foolish virgins and the 5 wise ones. And the 5, wise ones didn't use the oil they had stored for their walk to the wedding. They hung on to it for when it was necessary. That parable to me always felt a little bit of like a prepper parable. And what do you, hey, I mean, when the apocalypse first happened in March of 2020, when the beer flu went around, do you know what I mean by the beer flu? The corona bug?
Oh,
Beer flu? That's what they call it at all the right-wing outlets, because if you say corona, you'll get, the algorithms will do things with you. So they call it the beer flu. But when the beer flu hit, remember toilet paper?
oh,
How many of you went out and bought a little more than you normally would?
Couldn't find it.
Now, how many of you have more than you need right now of that? Nope, you're back in your same old, just got my 1 package, and when it runs out, I'll get another package. There's going to be a run on all kinds of stuff, friends. Okay? If you really are going to want to think about this, you're going to want, I mean, you've seen the grocery store shelves, right? I'm a prepper. I have enough food here for 6 months. I'm only feeding 1 person, right? And that doesn't count power outages. If I have a power outage, well, there goes my freezer. But I can't have a generator on my apartment. Otherwise, I'd have a generator. So I'm just saying, get ready. Get ready for cyber attacks. Get ready for power outages. Get ready for water issues. Get ready for there are more. we've had more toxic chemical accidents in the last 3 years than the last 30 years. Okay, this is not by mistake.
Michael, wouldn't you say that we are already a secular nation?
No, we're a hyper-religious nation.
By majority?
It doesn't matter because I don't necessarily by religious mean church going. I mean, we have a religious mentality, whether we're left, right, or atheistic. The atheists are just as religious as the Christians or the Jews.
Okay.
But everybody in America has an opinion about God. You go to Europe and it's whatever,
Really?
right?
Interesting.
We are in a hyper-religious time in America, and it's going to get worse because we keep electing these people to high positions of congressional and senatorial and judicial and executive power that are all coming out of that fundamentalist evangelical conquer the seven mountains mentality. We keep electing more and more and more of them. And that to me is the scariest thing.
I've just been thinking though about verse 13,
13.
where it says that this will be a time for you to serve as witnesses.
Mhm.
And it seems to be talking about how when you see those apocalyptic times, how you're supposed to live. And the bit that I underlined first of all was where it talks about, you know, you'll be persecuted and some of you will be killed. You'll be hated by everyone because of my name, yet not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your lives. And I'm just intrigued what if we unpack that, where it leads us, because I tied that in with a letter that Simone Weil wrote. And it was during the height, well, probably the worst part of the Second World War. And she wrote to one of her friends that I think, and so do you, that our obligation for the next 2 or 3 years, an obligation so strict that we can scarcely fail in it without treason, is to show the public the possibility of a truly incarnated Christ. So it brings it back to where are we in the midst of this and what are we representing?
I think that's exactly the point too, Mike. That's exactly the point. And by the way, if you were to take the hair, and not a head of your head will perish literally, where he says, you know, some of you are going to die, some of you won't, but a head of your hair will perish. If you did that literally, it doesn't work. It's incongruent. But if the text is saying something like, you will be put to death, but the Father has counted every last hair on your head, he will be able to reconstruct you. In other words, we're dealing here with the hope and the promise of a bodily resurrection. Those that thus endure to the end, to death, have the promise that whatever's on the other side, they will be there themselves.
Yeah, it's almost like the martyrs in the early church.
Exactly.
And their sort of sense that no matter what happens to them in this life, there is something greater and better beyond it.
Yeah. I think modern Christianity has denuded the promise of resurrection, bodily resurrection, and bodily resurrected life in the kingdom of God, the reign of God. We're so Platonic, our souls go to heaven, you know, and we don't seem to understand that this body, which is dying, it's inevitable that this body is going to die. Death doesn't mean it's the end of the person known as Michael. Michael has the promise now coming out of the other side of this death thing with a body that is immortal, imperishable, whose knees don't hurt all the time, you know, kind of thing.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, who's talking?
This is Dan.
Hey, Dan.
So I'm new to this, but this may be a little off topic, but what would you say happens to those who do not endure to the end?
They die. Again,
Like-
Jesus doesn't do any afterlife speculation on them, does he? It's just that, you know, those that don't. Here's the thing, Dan. So the question you asked is very good. I would give you the petition of the Lord's Prayer. Lead us not to the test, the pyrosmos. And the pyrosmos is a direct reference to the eschatological, under tribulation denial of Jesus. Jesus's pray. When you pray, the last thing you say is, Lord, please don't put me in that situation where if I have to choose between more and more pain or denying Jesus, I'm going to end up denying Jesus. I don't even want to go to that place. Jesus did say, if you deny him, he will deny you. If he said, if you're ashamed of him, he'll be ashamed of you. There's all that reciprocal language, eschatological reciprocal language, some of which, I'd be frank with you, I don't understand, some of which I have trouble with, all of which I am certain can be interpreted, but I'm not sure I'm the best one to interpret some of that language. It's this eschatological type language in the Gospels that gives me the most fit personally. Because
The most what?
fits.
Fits.
Yeah, because on the one hand, I want to be able to attribute to the historical Jesus the awareness of God's graciousness to all peoples. On the other hand, I have to be open and willing. I have to be open and willing enough to say that maybe there is this bit of violent divinity in the eschatology of Jesus, that maybe he didn't get rid of that. And it took a Paul to get rid of that, or a Doug Campbell, or a Karl Barth. But I am loath to move in that direction. And so my preference is to say, I'm just not smart enough to make sense of these texts yet, and I need to spend a lot more time with them. Does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, a little. I mean, I come from a background of, if you haven't received Christ, you're going to burn forever in hell. So just recently, I've been reading a lot of books like The Inescapable Love of God, and
Sure, Talbot.
learned about ultimate reconciliation of all. So I've been kind of focusing on that for a while now, and
Right.
it's a much more pleasant view of the cosmos.
It is.
And God.
Yes. And so, you know, part of what we are doing in this group, or at least what I'm doing, is I come to these texts and I say to the folks listening, I don't get it. I just have to tell you, I don't get it. You know, I can't make everything fit right now. I can make most things fit, but it's like somebody took 4 or 5 pieces out of another jigsaw puzzle and put them in my box. You know?
Yeah.
Michael, I just want to say to Mike Partridge, I'm really looking forward to your presentation
Yes.
on Simone.
Yeah.
I mean, I really am, because I don't know anything about it.
Well, we're gonna do at least 3 weeks, maybe 4.
Mhm.
And I don't mean me. I mean between Mike And well, I've got to talk to Mike because I'd like him to kind of head it up, but I'm hoping to bring Brad Jerzak in on this. Because he's a Simone Weil scholar as well. And you know, Mike has already recommended the book we're going to use. So I'll be working out the details of this with Mike in the next 8 to 10 days. And then we'll for April, we'll probably do this for April. And then we'll launch back in with something else in May.
Are you settled on the book?
We've decided, you decided on the book, right?
Yeah, waiting on God.
Waiting on God.
Waiting on, okay.
Yeah, it's a collection of letters and essays, and it's good stuff.
Yeah.
So what I might post in the discussion group, because it strikes me that sometimes with Simone Weil, a good place to start is to begin by asking the same sort of questions that she asks.
Mhm.
So I might just pose some of those questions to get people turning them over in their minds beforehand.
That would be wonderful. Let's talk about all that so we can get the timing down on that and have some good fun. Yeah,
Yep, sounds good.
yeah, awesome.
Michael. So okay, so you were talking about, or I guess a question first. So I know that early Jewish eschatology was pretty varied, but the idea of like the righteous having a bodily resurrection, inheriting the kingdom, that was that prominent in Second Temple Judaism?
Yeah, in fact, there are several notions of the resurrection. There is the general resurrection. In some texts, you know, everybody. In other texts, there's the resurrection of the just and then the resurrection of the unjust, and you find that in the Revelator, as well as other Jewish pseudepigraphal texts. And then in some, there's just the resurrection of the righteous, and what would seem to be apparently the kind of annihilation of everybody else. So there are different views of this resurrection thing.
Okay. So you were talking about verse 32. You said that Jesus, it seems that Jesus was acutely aware of an imminent end to what we call Second Temple Judaism. Does that mean that the ideology goes along with that, that he knew that?
I would think so. I would
Right.
think a whole bunch of shit went along with it, you know?
Yeah. So could that mean that their idea of that eschatology that they had, he was also kind of hinting at like that was going to go away too, that it was something else?
Well, ask yourself this question. Post 70 CE, Rabbi Yohan ben Zakkai gathers a small group of Jewish scholars in a little town called Yavne or Jamnia, and they're trying to rethink what it means to be a Jew. Now, Zakkai is a pacifist, okay? And this Judaism that will emerge, that we call rabbinic Judaism now, okay? There's no apocalyptic in it. Judaism has not had apocalyptic in it as a category since the 1st century.
Right.
They refuse to speculate. They refuse to talk about the end. There, you won't find any apocalyptic kind of language or discourse in the Talmud or the Mishnah or the Tosefta. You know,
Yeah.
it's gone.
Yeah.
It's
That's an
gone.
interesting connection. Yeah. I was something I've had thoughts about is that, at least like I see it especially in the Passion narrative, but I at least get this idea that Jesus kind of speaks about almost that there, you know, and I think it's symbolized through his resurrection, but it's almost like there's life in death, in that it's almost that like true life doesn't start until you die. And
Yes.
I wonder if that could be more of a something, not something super literal, not something we experience, but rather this kind of bigger idea of life and of what that means for us. Because I very much get from the text that, at least for a lot of Jesus's followers, the ending is not supposed to be sunshine and rainbows. A lot of it will lead to death, but it seems that like it's almost overlooking that and saying, don't hyper focus on your bodily death. It's about something bigger than that. You're living on beyond that.
Yeah. Again, we have this bad 2,000 years of Platonic thinking, right?
Yeah.
And so we're not taught that we don't have to fear death. Death is not the end of us.
Mhm.
And by God, the human species wants that to be true in so many ways. They talk about reincarnation or whatever. They want that. We fear death. We fear death. We are the species that fears death. And we orient our life around the fact that we're going to die. We try to make our time valuable and meaningful, and all that stuff.
Mhm.
We don't have to fear death because death is just a transition.
Yeah.
This life is about creating the seed. Death is the planting of the seed in the soil. And the next life is that seed grows and bears fruit.
Yeah. And I think you could also connect it to a little bit with like anthropology and saying, death is it's the driving point for why the way we act, especially in society and in groups. And it's that, in a way, that fear of death is what causes us to be as violent as we are. And it's
Yeah.
only when you can free yourself of that fear that you can stop having enemies and that you can stop worrying about that.
Dude, package that, market it, get it out there. That is the gospel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey guys, it's 4:30. I want to thank you. Next week, we get to go all the way through Thursday and the Last Supper, and we only have 2 more weeks after that, and then we'll after a little, whether I'm still going to teach a couple of things for March or not, I think I probably will. I have some ideas I want to do, but in April to have Mike, and that'll give him a month to prep for his Simone Weil stuff, or toward the end of March. So we'll see. Don't know how many Thursdays March has. But anyway, thanks everybody. Thank you. Does anybody need to change their clothing? No, you're all good. All right, man. Grace and peace and love, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Michael.